that personal development moves through a series of levels. Now, one of the things, as I understand, the theory maintains is that there are associated with these levels of development certain kinds of neurosis that are qualitatively different types of neurosis associated with or are expressed at different levels of development. I wonder if you could sort of sketch very briefly the levels of development and then particularly focus on the types of neurosis associated with each level of development.
Good, thank you very much. This is a very interesting question. But do you want a description of, once more, description of all levels of development, primarily, and after to try to characterize the levels of psychoneurosis linked to this?
What if we just name the levels of development and then focus on the characterization of the neurosis associated with each level?
Good. Well, you know very well that psychopathy is treated by psychiatrists not as a pathological processus, but as a structures. Well, in my opinion, they are not very clearly seen processus in psychopaths. Well, this means psychopathy as a sickness, if you permit, as a illness, if you permit me this expression, is linked strictly with first level of development, with integration.
That's unilevel integration.
Yes. No. With not with unilevel disintegration, but with primarily primitive integration. They are integrated. Mm-hmm. Well, with very strong instincts, primitive instincts, with complete subordination of activity of intelligence to such an instinct, with complete lack of empathy, or generally speaking, lack of empathy, without internal conflicts. They are stereotyped, they are rigid, they are narrow, psychically narrow. Well, this is characteristic of psychopathy, and in the same time first level, how we can say, I cannot say of development, but after all, basical level of human existence. This is the lowest level of
right. May I interrupt
organization of people, yes.
May I interrupt for a minute? That's the level then at which the person is pretty well controlled by his biological given and what is determined in his immediate environment.
Yes,
it's automatic.
Yes, automatic, but with fairly good intelligence and good ability to adjust to many different societies. Always in the way to develop own interests, own ambitions. Such people are very clever.
In using the term empathy just now, describing absence of it in psychopaths, are you referring here to empathy in the sense of understanding another person, or are you referring to empathy in terms of some kind of basic concern about the welfare of another? It seems to me that the latter is lacking in a psychopath. The former may very well be there. Do you agree?
You know, my notion of empathy is that this is syntony on the very high level of development with reflectivity, with tendency to help others, with high level of understanding of others. But without such a instinctive drive toward syntony, with a tendency to temperamental identification. No, this is syntony, right. And empathy is never linked with such a temperamental, automatic affectivity.
Right. Oh, okay. At this first level, then, you use the word psychopath. Now, it seems to me that becomes used a little different by yourself than, say, the term psychopath has been used in the literature. Is that true?
You know, I think that you observe this, that term psychopathy in the literature means something very mixed, and very, very insufficiently defined. Excuse me, please, for such a statement, but I think that this description from my side is fairly clear. This is not mixture of psychoneurosis and psychopathy and so on, and not association with any mental retardation and so on. This is fairly clear unity, and this is not unity by classification, but I think this is based on observation, of very large observations.
Before we get to the second level, I wonder if you would comment. I understand that that you've characterized that level as, have made the claim that that level could be analyzed by simple stimulus-response behavior theory.
Yes, clearly.
I see. So you would identify behavior theory with that level of development. As
not only with this level, but also with second level of development, but not further.
I see. Perhaps you could describe the second level as well.
Well, second level means unilevel disintegration, and as you know, this is characterized by ambivalencies, ambitendencies, disharmony, without any hierarchizations. This means people on this level present plenty of overexcitability, but without any direction, always with hesitation, with changing of feeling, with changing of humor, and so on and so on. For this reason, without such a possibility to go toward higher level or to descend to a primitive level, from this level are people psychosis and severe psychoneurosis developed. We see plenty of psychosis on this level.
Of psychosis? Of
psychosis, because at this level people are lost, have no direction, have no clear way toward development. Present plenty, as I told you, plenty of hesitation, of inhibitions, of fears, of obsessions and so on, without any possibility to go out from such a states. For this reason, from this level, we observe on this level plenty of psychosis and very severe psychoneurosis.
So that kind of unilevel disintegration can result in negative disintegration?
Surely.
At that level?
Surely. This means this level have two possibilities, or to go toward psychosis or even suicide, to go toward a bit higher level with something increasing of self-consciousness, or even to descend a bit of toward a lower level through instinct of self-preservation, through action of instinct of self-preservation. Because I cannot be developed, I do not see any canalization toward a higher level, I should be preserved by something like more integration, and they descend a bit to a lower level, on the borderline of psychopathy and psychoneurosis. I
see. So they, instead of after the initial disintegration or the ambitendencies or ambivalences, there's a possibility of moving back to reintegration at the lowest level almost.
Yes. Or to, as I told you, or to become psychotics, severe psychoneurotics, or even commit suicide, or little by little to discover, perhaps you will correct me, something like canalization toward higher level of development.
At this level, then, the psychoneurotic, who is severely psychoneurotic, that is not the psychoneurotic you have in mind when you say that type of psychoneurosis is not an illness.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, you know that I introduced in my theory the so-called interneurotic and intraneurotic differences in the level of functions. This will be people with a lower level or lowest level of psychoneurotic symptoms. They have possibility to develop themselves, but they have also possibility to descend or to completely dissolve themselves in severe psychosis.
Okay, what about I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, and you can see some kind of psychoneurotic here on this level. You find, for instance, very often hypochondria. You find very often neurasthenia, you find conversion hysteria on this level, or on the borderline of second and third, and you have very often so-called organs neurosis.
Organic neurosis.
Organic, no, not organic, but organs.
Organ neurosis, okay, yeah.
Organ neurosis, and well, hot more. Something like sexual neurosis. This means neuroses, they are rather narrow in contents and directed toward oneself and one's problems and fairly stereotyped. And here you can act through, in my opinion, through behavioristic method of treatment in relation to part of such a psychoneuretics.
From your description of this level, it seems that the symptoms are more likely to be closely associated with organs, more likely to be associated with basic neurophysiological processes, the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems.
They present so-called somatization very often.
Okay. Does that suggest that perhaps, again, a psychoanalytic description, especially that related to hysteria and conversion symptoms, is more appropriate to description of psychoneuroses at this level?
Yes, but in relation to such a kind of neurosis like conversion hysteria or even lower level of hysteria. Well, I want to underline that I see multi-levelness in relation to psychoneurosis. And at the second level, you observe the lowest level of psychoneurotic symptoms. And one more, I am not sure I presented this, that's one of a special characteristic of this level is lack of hierarchization. Lack of possibility to see hierarchy and multi-levelness. For this reason, this is very, I can say, very severe. This stage or level present very severe conditions. The most severe condition in development.
The fact that you include schizophrenia and some of the other psychoses in this level, that
yes.
suggests
this means not all schizophrenias, but mostly yes.
Would you exclude some of the so-called acute schizophrenic episodes from this?
Yes, acute, and after rather mostly of catatonics, I see on the borderline of 2 and 3. Mostly of catatonics and acute forms, and some even of paranoid schizophrenia, but some only.
What about and I sort of really like to get this in, what about the creative type of schizophrenia you find in Kafka, for example?
Yes, well, this is in my observation, almost of such cases are developing on the borderline of 2 and 3, and even in the first stage of level 3.
Could we get to level 3? What happens after level 3?
Well, this is something very dominant, something very clear. This is coming a factor of hierarchization. Hierarchization, multi-levelness in relation to oneself and in relation to others. This means I permitted me, I think yesterday, to give something like group of dynamism. They are characteristic for this level. This means astonishment toward oneself and toward others, and disquietude toward oneself and others, feeling of inferiority toward oneself in comparison with feeling of inferiority toward external world described by Adler. Next, feeling of shame and guilt, dissatisfaction with oneself, positive maladjustment, and clear creativity instinct. All this, besides of creativity, of some kind of creativity instinct, present multi-levelness in development, in how I can say, in emotional experience and so on. All such a dynamics surely present multi-levelness. If you will take, for instance, a feeling of inferiority toward oneself, you will see clearly the factor of multi-levelness. If you will see disquietude toward oneself, not in relation to instinct of self-preservation, but in relation to instinct of development and perfection, you will see very clearly hierarchy, the factor of hierarchy. If you will see, for instance, feeling of shame and guilt also, if you look at positive maladjustment present something like factor of hierarchization.
Right. By positive maladjustment, you're referring here to sort of the withdrawal from everyday reality for the sake of sort of creating oneself. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
This means they observe their environment. They present very reflective way in their attitude toward reality and toward oneself, and they discover that with clear, stable adaptation toward external environment and toward his lower self, this will be no development.
Now, at this stage, then it's very likely that you'll find a mixture of symptoms, including some of the neurophysiological or organic disturbances that would characterize level 2,
Yes.
as well as now some sort of higher level concerns.
Yes.
The mixture of the symptoms is largely what characterizes this
Yes.
level.
Well, you observe some of the same group of psychoneurosis as at the second level, but much more conscious, much more directed by oneself, with much more, I can say, higher psychological traits. You can see also conversion hysteria on the first stage of third level, but this will be with very clear prevalence of psychosomatic factors, not somatopsychic. And with factor of self-consciousness, and a small factor even, presented ability for autopsychotherapy. You can observe also neurasthenia, but rather on the borderline of psychasthenia. This is the same family: hypochondria, neurasthenia, psychasthenia, but the psychasthenia is the highest one, representing the highest level of functions. You can have on this level neurasthenia, but with tendency toward transformation in the direction of psychasthenia. You can have hysteria, as I told you about conversion hysteria, but rather with other kind of hysterical attitude, even I can say similar to hysteria, and this group of symptoms, this is difficult to call true hysteria. Next, for instance, you begin to observe anxiety neurosis, but rather directed toward other people, toward existential problems. This means this is something like form of anxiety with some alterocentric traits, with existential traits, with something like philosophical color in all this. You have here depression, but depression which is not only I can say automatical, but in which you can discern something like not only depression but analysis on depression to transform this depression in more creative form. This means, as you see in manic depressive states, but on a higher level, manic stage could represent creativity, and depressive stage could express something like deep analysis of oneself, of one's creativity and so on, and something like purification of chaotic creativity. This is a kind of depression. Next, you have obsessions, surely. Neurosis of obsession. But, well, neurosis of obsession directed by many positive ideas, by many positive hierarchies, but by many alterocentric attitudes. Surely Jeanne d'Arc was great obsessive, presented great obsessive psychoneurosis. But how you can classify this young girl? His obsession was in the service of very clear ideas. Well, and this is transformation from the lower level of psychoneurosis to higher and higher. And at the second stage of third level, and on the borderline of third and fourth, you have the picture very clearly changed. You will find clearly existential psychoneurosis. This means obsessions and depressions and fears and so on, like in Kierkegaard, in Kafka and so on. You can observe obsessions like in Jeanne d'Arc, or in many great men they presented in the same time psychoneurotic traits. You will see always hierarchization in the symptoms and in conscious relation to such symptoms. You will have, I can say, psychoneurosis in the service of development, like in Kierkegaard cases when he told, well, depression and anxiety is my friend and in the same time enemy. Enemy because I have, that's this is unpleasant. Mm-hmm. And friend because I see clearly the possibility of development through such a experience. His very clear statement. The same was with Kafka, the same was with Keats, the same was with very great Polish physician who was killed by Nazis, and who had such an attitude toward his own psychoneurosis. He told that I do not want, never have at my home psychiatrists. Because I do not want to reject my experience and such a stimuli. And there are many hundreds of such opinions of eminent personalities. This means more people are developed, more they accept something creative in own psychoneurotic symptoms and dynamisms.
You say somewhere that psychopaths have aims but no values, and neurotics have values and no aims. And you want to comment on that? I mean, is in fact the case that neurotics who have this hierarchicalization very often find it difficult to express themselves in this particular task?
Surely, but I cannot say that psychoneurotics have no aims, but have terrible difficulties to find appropriate for their level aims.
Right.
This means that they are always searching higher and higher aims. And in biographies of eminent personalities, you can find thousands of examples of this. You know Weininger, for instance, this young fellow from Austria who committed suicide at 21 in 1 year after receiving a PhD, and who told very clearly that, I do not want to live. I can live with highest and clearest aims, or I want to commit suicide, or to be somebody very bad. This means I not remind his expression, clear expression, but he expressed this, that even he see possibility to descend to a lower level, to reject terrible agony. But this was not real from himself. This was impossible for him to descend. Only to commit suicide, or to have a possibility for realization a high level of aims.
So then suicide doesn't simply characterize the second level in the scheme that you've described. Suicide may be,
Yes.
as I understand it, a legitimate possibility at a higher level of
Yes,
development.
and I never have such opinions. This means you can have plenty of suicide at third level of development, but you have not at fourth level or at borderline to three and four. But at third level, yes, and especially in the first stage of third level, you can have plenty of suicides. I'm not sure I answered for your question.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm wondering about is that the various neuroses are obviously in service of either development or a distinction we made in I think the first lecture was between personality and individuality. Could you say that at low levels, neurosis is simply in service of individuality?
Yes. Yes.
And at high levels, it's in service of development.
Yes. And perhaps we can discuss 1 minute about these differences once more between individuality and personality.
Yeah, I think that would be good. You wanted to comment on that.
Well, individuality could express very high level of aptitude, mostly one-sided. Very great creativity, mostly one-sided creativity. But in individuality, you have not collaboration between instinct of creativity and instinct of self-perfection. They do not understand sufficiently hierarchy of levels of reality and hierarchy of aims. For instance, in arts, you will see many individualities. They do art for aim to be creative, not in subordination to higher reality, higher ideals, not in the service of something higher. Art is for them art for art.
Would you care to apply a term like narcissistic art? Is that?
In some extent, yes.
Yeah.
In some extent, yes.
So one of the important things I hear you saying as well is that the intelligence and creativity or aptitude is not necessarily highly correlated with that process of development. In other words, one can have high intellectual capacities and even aptitudes and even certain creative talents at the lowest level of development. One that may be visible, but it'd be very one-sided, is it?
Yes. Well, I want to underline one thing. For instance, take some artists, painters. They are interested in how I can say, in that nature, to paint something like fruits, like fish, like this.
Okay.
They like this, and compare this with creativity of, for instance, of Van Gogh or Michelangelo. In some epoch, as you know, in Michelangelo's creativity, he rejected the value of arts. He destroyed many of his pictures, because he have seen at some time, very high level of new values. What means new values? This means, for instance, problem of death, problem of immortality, problem of love.
Yeah. Would you comment on say someone like you've commented on Michelangelo? What about I know you've tended to characterize, for example, Beethoven's third symphony as being characteristic of borderline 2/3. You would take certain expressions of art, say, could you take something like Michelangelo's and say, now that's an expression of a certain level of his development, of a certain stage in his development?
Yes, I think that this is a fairly clear difference. I think that Beethoven was in some of his creativity on a very high level, but this was from time to time. I think that's mostly of his creativity, even very even high, was on the level of developing personality, on the borderline of 2 and 3, and first part of 3, as a global personality. And this is, we can observe this in his life also. Michelangelo was not, although the highest personality from the global point of view, but I think that, generally speaking, he was at the level of borderline of 3 and 4.
That indicates, I guess, that artists may very well be giving some symbolic form to their developmental process in their art. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes. Well, take Rembrandt. All creativity of Rembrandt. This is almost all creativity of Rembrandt was almost on the very high level.
Then it may also be possible to characterize the artistic product in terms of its reflection of different levels of development.
Well, this is excuse me please, my aggressivity, if you permit this, toward so-called subjective, complete subjectivity in description and in evaluation of arts. I do not agree. Well, for instance, music of, correct me please, of an everyday life army march is on a very low level. Compare this with something like Mozart and so on, and you will see clearly the difference. Or very simple polkas or like this, and something like this concerto of Beethoven, in relation to which Aldous Huxley told that this is, well, how I can say, heavenly music. Well, this is very clear difference. Much more difficult than differentiation between one and another level of intellectual activity. But after all, very possible, and in the general lines, very clear. And I think that's, well, psychologists and very often philosopher, positivist philosopher, mixed all this. Excuse me please for such a, this is also a bit of aggressivity.
We've sort of focused on the arts. What about technology? What about how would you characterize, for example, our present age, if you like, which is highly specialized, in which people are highly...
Psychopathic age.
As a psychopathic age?
Yes.
Would you see that as a reflection of one-sided development as well?
Well, I think that this is clearly one-sided development. This means even you do not control by your higher emotions this direction of development, industrial and technological and so on. This is a very great danger, and I should not repeat this for humanity. Mm-hmm. This is one-sided. This is rather connected with psychopathic traits, with psychopathic tendencies. To develop something one-sided.
But very intellectual, or very...
Yeah, surely, but this is intellect in the service of some automatic, perhaps creative, but one-sided and automatic forces. In the service of productivity, in the service of clear-seen effectivity. Mm-hmm. Well, you cannot say that Beethoven or Michelangelo or Van Gogh was productive. Even in mostly of creative people, you know that the judgment was almost null. That they presented nothing creative. Because they presented not any productivity in the everyday life meaning.
Okay, so that suggests that perhaps one of the problems with the contemporary culture is not that it is psychopathic, but that it is a one-sided devotion to the everyday preoccupations of making a living, so what are usually referred to as materialistic goals.
Yes.
Would you suggest that part of the imbalance is in that there is little opportunity for positive sort of withdrawal from those preoccupations?
Surely. This means I think that I can say I do this for a rather dialectic attitude. I cannot say strictly that this is psychopathic period. But, well, I have my opinion near to this, that this is prevalence of psychopathic traits in our culture, and that psychoneurotic, who are very creative, are completely subordinated to psychopathic directions.
I wonder if I could take the discussion just in a little different direction again. I guess psychoanalysis has a theory whereby certain types of people develop certain types of defense mechanisms that's dependent upon certain characteristics. It seems to me that even in your notion of development, certain people develop a one-sidedness intellectually, other people perhaps might develop it on an emotional or a more sensual level. Now, you have talked about overexcitabilities, and is it these overexcitabilities that account for the direction that development takes? In other words, would you first of all tell us what you mean by overexcitabilities, and then how do these account for, say, intellectual or one-sided development or emotional or one-sided development?
Well, how you can define overexcitability? This is, they are, firstly, the reaction on stimuli of everyday life are much more stronger in people with overexcitability. That's in so-called normal. Next, this is, how I can say, this is specificity of reaction in specific forms on stimuli of different kind. This means that if you are emotionally overexcitable and you will have stimulus from the field of sensory, of psychomotor field, you will react in your way. This means in emotional way. Next point will be that you will observe prolongation of reaction. And next, complicated reactions, large multi-dimensional reactions, and very often multi-level. In relation to hierarchy of overexcitability, in my opinion, psychomotor overexcitability and sensual overexcitability present a rather lower level of overexcitability. Emotional overexcitability, imaginational overexcitability, and intellectual present higher level, much more complicated. If you see in people something like reflective but emotional or imaginational overexcitability, you can be almost sure, not sure, but almost sure that you have somebody who is rich in potential for development, have fairly strong possibilities to develop it.
This is somewhat a foreign notion, isn't it, to psychology and
Yes.
I think thinking in general that the same stimulus event can affect individuals differently in the sense of, and some of them affect them in a sensual fashion or in emotional fashion or in intellectual fashion. It seems to me that, or the investment of energy in the object almost in the sense of, the psychoanalytic sense of cathexis, for example, it's almost, it seems to me that's quite foreign to
I think so. Well, this is not my elaboration. No, perhaps my elaboration, but I have seen in the literature something like this. But well, generally speaking, people accept that well, the same kind of stimuli give the same kind of answer. And you see here in such a attitude the beginning of mechanism of inner psychic transformation.
I think it's no coincidence that both the form and content of your description of overexcitability is similar to Jung's description of the types. You mentioned imagination, which may be related to his intuitive function. You mentioned sensuality, overexcitement in the sensual arena, which may be related to his sensation function. thinking related to the intellectual overexcitability and feeling related to emotional overexcitability. When Jung talks about these functions, though, he talks about, in the sequence of development, as if there were a couple of stages, one of which is almost the over-differentiation or over-development of one of these types. And then later in life, the process changes where integration of the variety of these different functions is the focus of the individual's concern. Is that at all the case with the higher levels of development in your description? That is, that with the higher levels of development, more of these areas of overexcitability become potential for the individual?
Now, surely, if they even appear at the early age in children, they present already clear potential for development. Very clear. This is one of the first point for development. There are surely similarities between elaboration of Jung and my elaboration, but this is, after all, clearly different in development of such a characteristic, and even in kind of overexcitabilities. He accepts some of the same categories, like emotional and imaginative and sensual.
The one that is absent is a psychomotor overexcitability, which you talk about, and he doesn't.
Psychomotor, yes. I am not sure if he is speaking about overexcitability.
I see.
He presents something like characteristic of some kind of reactivity toward reality. But if I remember, I do not think so. He is speaking about overexcitabilities.
Yeah. You may very well be right. One of the interesting points about Jung in comparison with your description is that he talks about the differentiation and development of these different functions.
Yes.
And it seems that in his description, even the goal of individuation or psychological development may be the integration of these different functions, whereas you're saying, as I understand you, that the overexcitability within these areas may be the precondition for psychological development rather than its goal.
Yes,
right?
And one more thing. He treated, as you know, psychoneurosis and nervousness, this means overexcitability in my opinion, as something pathological. This means from time to time he hesitated. As you know, I have admiration for Jung. This is somebody, well, in relation to which I have never any aggressivity. This means he, after all, he hesitated, but generally speaking, he treated all psychoneurosis like something negative, as illness. And this is also difference in relation to overexcitabilities.
There is the commonality, another commonality with Jung, for example. You speak of the introvert, or say the extrovert becoming, the introvert becoming, say, a meditative or an extrovert with meditative tendencies. So there is the reach to achieve one's opposite, which seems to be something along the same lines as Jung.
Yes, no, this is Jung. This is elaborated by me, but this is not my my concept. For instance, you can find in Rorschach.
Right.
In Rorschach, so-called contact introversion,
Right.
and this is very near to all this. Only I elaborated this fairly well and introduced to systematization.
I understand, to move on, that part of your therapeutic, or part of your therapeutic approach, or part of your therapy, is in fact diagnosing with the patient his own level of personal development. So diagnosis becomes part of the therapy process.
Yes, very clearly.
What type of approach would you concretely take with, say, a client or patient in your office, would you sit down and begin to, well, you would apply the same types of tests that we outlined before, a multidimensional, as you call them, various tests?
Yes, you know, my therapy, well, if I am not in a how I can say, prevalent condition I do not like, I begin my therapy through the very sympathetic contact with client. This means I am going with him to promenade. I am going with him very often to cafeteria or to cinema or to theater or to something like excursion and so on, if I have possibility, always this. And after we begin to know each other. And after I propose him very systematic, multidimensional, multi-level examination.
Okay, now the multidimensional refers to various tasks, and multi-level refers to his level of development.
Yes. And this is very systematic examination with all possible methods, well adjusted to concrete case. And if I have to do with a cultural patient who understands many things and have tendency to understand, well, after all examination and interpretation, I elaborate this synthesis, and I see something like developmental in this case, very clearly developmental, and based on strict diagnosis, strict testing. And after I begin to speak to the patient and introduce him in all details. And well, I present him, well, you have something like difficulties, such, and why you have such a difficulties. But besides of this, you have such positive point, such kind of richness, of creativity, and I begin to discuss with him why so-called pathological symptoms are very closely related to his potential of development and to his so-called pathological symptoms. If he accepts, and mostly of the patient on a fairly high level accept this, mostly, not all, well, I am in a very good position, because this begins something like very clear collaboration in further diagnosis together with therapy and preparation for autopsychotherapy. I never treat the patient with such a characters for a long time, never. This means I have, for instance, 5, 6, 7, 10 admissions. This is in almost all cases sufficient. And after I see the client one time for a half year or one time for 1 year, if he wants. But this will be in very changeable conditions. This means he stops very rashly, very quickly to be my patient. I cannot treat him as a patient. Mostly of, excuse me please for such a opinion, but mostly of my patient on this level, cultural level, are, I can say, my friends.
The patient, in fact, or your friends,
yes,
become co-authors of the diagnosis. They, in
Sure.
fact, help to diagnose.
Surely.
you.
This means without co-diagnosis with such a cultural patients, I do not see any value or very small value of diagnosis. This should pass through emotional and intellectual experience of the patient. Surely, if he have potential for development.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's the prerequisite for that.
Yes.
But it certainly is a contrast to the more typical procedure of obtaining a diagnosis via some battery of tests and interviews, and then in the therapy,
Yes.
still acting as if only you should have access to that information, and that the client should sort of discover this for himself in the course of the therapeutic intervention.
This is completely against all this. And one more thing, I developed the necessity to have a subjective attitude toward patient. This means to see his richness, his creativity, his individuality, his differences and so on. Never treat objectively. This means through testing. After all, we have objective image and picture, surely. But by this subjective attitude, the patient begins to be open, and he's, how I can say, I have possibility to have much more objective evaluation by this openness of the patient. By subjective attitude, I think we have much and much more possibility for objective evaluation of the patient. I'm not sure I am clear here.
I'm not sure what the subjective attitude is that you're talking about.
This
does
means,
it mean that
yes.
When you offer your diagnosis of an aspect of that individual's life that you do so tentatively, suggest this is something that may represent important concerns in his life, an important developmental
Yes.
trend and so on? Is it the tentativeness of your diagnosis that you're talking about when you refer to the subjectivity of your...
Yes, this means this beginning of contact with clients means that I want to have everyday life subjective relation toward patients. I cannot look at him in the first contacts as to somebody I should, how I can say, examine and have objective picture. Never. This means I treat him as a somebody unique, as a somebody very individual. And after this is not difficult to pass to a very objective examination. But you have already something like hypothesis, and very rich hypothesis in relation to the patient. With the method of objectivation from the first step, you have never such a richness of picture as you have with your subjective attitude toward patient.
But what you described about presenting the diagnosis to the patient is still quite different than, say, the stance taken in client-centered therapies, where the therapist, by and large, reflects, perhaps in slightly altered form, what the individual represents about himself. It's almost as if the client-centered therapist is focusing even more than you on encouraging the individual to spell out or diagnose himself. Perhaps he even gets less help from the therapist than you're likely to offer. Is that impression accurate?
Yes. Well, because you discuss problem of Rogers, I can say that this is one of the therapists I like very much. Only what are some differences? He does not accept primarily diagnosis. His diagnosis is for him, and after many sessions. And this is always only psychological diagnosis. Never neurological, and never other kind of diagnosis. This is one where I am in the position of some difference with Rogers. Next, I do not think so he accept so largely and so strongly the potential for development, of the potential for negative development. And next, perhaps third, in some cases you should not wait for the patient's, how I can say, exteriorization. You have plenty of patients, they could wait, surely, and here I agree with Rogers. But in some cases, many patients go out because they wait for, in the first meeting, in the second, third, for already something like help.
So you intervene immediately?
Yes.
I think implicitly Rogers is using that as one of the criteria for prognosis. In other words, the individual who leaves during those early and very difficult stages of therapy is likely, in his judgment, to be one who is not ready to work, not ready to engage himself fully.
But you know, is that not also the problem of psychological type? You have some people with psychomotor overexcitability, you have extravert, you have, well, cyclic types, and they want rather fairly quick diagnosis and so on. They could collaborate, but they wait for something like fairly quick help. And I do not think so. This is a sign of rather negative sign of possibility of effects in therapy. Very often this is psychological type.
And you also mentioned that you thought that Rogers did not have sufficient appreciation for developmental potential in individuals.
This means he do not believe sufficiently strongly in so-called constitution and heredity.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes, well, this he accepts. Surely he's so intelligent and so multidimensional, and that's he see this, but not emphasize this sufficiently, in my opinion.
It seems to me those are more limitations than anything else. I've always been impressed by Rogers' sort of, tremendous degree of optimism with respect to almost any client. It seems to me when you say he doesn't take sufficient account of hereditary or constitutional factors, that he doesn't sufficiently limit the potential of his client.
Yes, no, this means, I think, perhaps he's even more optimistic than me.
Yes, yeah.
Perhaps, but well, after all, well, I see after first, second, third examination, I see very great limitation in relation to some patients, as for instance, in relation to psychopaths, or the first part of second level of unilevel disintegration. I think he's a bit more, or perhaps more than bit,
yes,
optimistic. And well, I think that he accepts primarily mostly of patients. And in my practice, I rather, in the mild form, I rather reject some kind of patients for the treatment, because I do not believe in the result of therapy.
Rogers might have done well to listen to that kind of advice before he embarked on this large program with schizophrenics, which showed that they were unable to facilitate any overall change as well.
Well, I do not believe in treatment of psychopaths and the borderline of level 1 and 2, but I believe perhaps in the same extent in possibility with some kind of schizophrenics. And I have had plenty of some kind of schizophrenics in my practice. Catatonics and...
I see a problem emerging. When I listen to you talk about the method of treatment, to me, in the higher level of neurosis, in the higher levels, the third and fourth level, if a person comes very seriously disturbed to the point of suicidal tendencies, and part of the therapy would imply that he learns something about the theory. Now, that to me, if I'm confused and somebody tells me their theory, I tend to map onto it. I tend to identify with it, which to me would imply that it'd be more effective, like in terms of self-concept and everything else about the theory, if you viewed the thing from his point of view.
Yes, this means one remark. Well, on the fourth level, not on the borderline of 3 and 4th, but on the fourth level, good developed, you have no problem with therapy. You always use autopsychotherapy. You can see 1-2 times so-called client, but mostly of such a clients are not clients. This means they are not searching physician, or they are searching for a special kind of physician. Next, I never or almost never give something like explanation of my theory, or I do not suggest to read my books for the patient. This is in next stage. They should elaborate one attitude toward the practice of diagnosis and therapy, and after, yes, if they accept, well, they could develop this knowledge of theory of positive integration.
But you do therapy through books. In other words, you do suggest, part of your therapy is a relearning process, in fact, by reading certain authors and by visiting certain places, by making new contact with family members, for example, or friends.
Surely you can say even that with introduction of the client to his own diagnosis, this is already influence of the theory, surely. But well, this is not the same like to propose to the client to be acquainted deeply with theory.
No, right.
This is no case.
Has the theory made any personal, like have you personally benefited in terms of autopsychotherapy from your theory?
A benefit, that's, well, surely yes. But, you know, my theory was not elaborated primarily and not influenced my experience. This is contrary. I have had very large and very multidimensional experience, and after some research work, and after I begin to elaborate this theory. This is nothing abstractive and a priori, no. I think I treat my theory as very, how I can say, empirical. Perhaps I am wrong in some extent. You can always search for something a priori. But in my opinion, well, and I can discuss this, and even I can agree with some of your hypotheses. But I think that generally speaking, this is very empirical.